Greetings, my little magwai. This is Tim Ferriss, and I'm going to read you a legal disclaimer for this episode. I don't do many of these, but at the behest of my ever-so-competent legal counsel, allow me to read the following. I'm not recommending, endorsing, or supporting any of the substances or compounds discussed or described in this interview, particularly when this applies to illegal, illicit, or dangerous compounds or substances. I'm interviewing Patrick, furthermore, as a journalist seeking additional information regarding matters of public interest and concern. And you shall also notice that we have removed a number of names of different folks to protect the innocent, guilty, or otherwise. And with all of that said, since I've covered my little white ass, please enjoy.
Optimal minimal. At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite? I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over metal endoskeleton. Ferriss Show.
Hello, all you freaks out there, and aren't we all freaks at the end of the day? This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show. If you liked my episode with Dom D'Agostino, the incredible scientist who fasted 6-7 days, whatever it was, deadlifted 500 pounds for 10 reps, and continues to do amazing work for the Department of Defense with exogenous ketones, etc., you might love this one. So, here we go. Patrick Arnold is widely considered the father of prohormones. He's also an organic chemist known for introducing androstenedione, remember Mark McGwire, 1-androstenediol, marketed as 1-AD, and methylhexanamine, if I'm getting that correct, into the dietary supplement market. And I'm going to mangle quite a few of these types of words. Now, you may recognize the name and say, why do I know that name, Patrick Arnold? He also created the designer steroid tetrahydrogestrone, best known as THG or the Clear. THG, along with two other anabolic steroids that Patrick manufactured, perhaps the best known of the two being norbolethone, not banned at the time of their creation, this is very important, were hard to detect drugs at the heart of the Balco professional sports doping scandal, which thrust Barry Bonds and others into the spotlight. I was in the Bay Area when this happened. Balco distributed these worldwide world-class athletes in a whole slew of sports, ranging from track and field to professional baseball and football. More recently, Patrick has been innovating in the legal world of ketone supplementation, and that's actually how he connected with Dom, including breakthroughs in performance and taste with products like KetoForce, like KetoCaNa, and both of those ended up coming up, I believe, in my conversation with Dom because they have some very, very, very interesting applications. If you'd like to meet Patrick in person, the infamous Patrick Arnold in person, you can find him at the Arnold Classic in Columbus, Ohio from March 3rd to 6th, 2016. So that's coming up very soon for those of you who are listening to this when it first comes out at booth 328. So I believe that will be the Keto Sports booth at 328. Otherwise, you can check out his current concoctions for athletes at ketosports.com as well as prototypenutrition.com. In this science-dense conversation, we cover a ton. Most of it's related to better performance through chemistry. We also discuss Patrick's biggest successes and mistakes, his path to science, exogenous ketone supplementation for sports, of course, as well as nonsense in the media about anabolics and performance-enhancing drugs. For example, the Delta 2 scandal that came out not too long ago, and lots of misinformation related to that. So, I will, with one more caveat, let us get into it. This is a dense conversation. And as always, with my podcast, with my blog posts, I don't try to put out an episode that everyone will love. There's no such thing. I try to put out episodes that a fraction of my listenership, in this case, will love and really get into because there's tons of detail in the weeds. If this episode isn't for you, that's okay. You can try something else like Jamie Foxx or Josh Waitzkin, the chess prodigy. My goal is with every, say, 5 episodes or so to hit everybody in my audience. But this is a very cool episode. It's highly specific and I do hope you enjoy it. So here is Patrick Arnold. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I have been looking forward to this and hoping that we might cross paths for such a long time. I've had many requests, and when I look back at the supplements, for instance, that have had an impact on me, and I look at the common thread kind of in retrospect, you've had a hand in pretty much all of them. and it's an area where I have a very high degree of insecurity. I've never studied, say, organic chemistry to any extent, and it's kind of like Latin in so much as I've read a lot of these words, but I'm sure I will mispronounce a lot. So feel free to correct me. But I wanted to begin at the beginning, I guess, and just to ask you if you could talk about how you developed a passion for chemistry, because it's not a hot subject in the same way that, say, computer science is very in, right? How did that start?
Well, I would say that to tell my story, I'd have to talk about how I gained a passion for weightlifting, bodybuilding, at the same time that I grew a passion for chemistry. And I'll start with the weightlifting part because that happened earlier, and that happened when my grandfather had a old set of York weights in his basement, and we brought them all down to our basement, and we ended up buying benches and whatnot from this guy in Wallingford, Connecticut that had his forgery there, and he made this really cool hardcore stuff and everything. We set up our own little gym. So I was around 12, 13 years old. So we were one of the first people in our neighborhood to start lifting weights, and, really got into it and all that. So later on, I've always was very science oriented. My father always had encyclopedias, science books, and I used to read about the universe and astronomy and be fascinated by that. And later I got fascinated by nutrition, and that part of that had to do with the fitness stuff I was getting into, all the weightlifting and all that. I got into, what do I eat to gain muscle, to be healthy, so I can run farther and all that. And later on, and I remember the first time I ever heard about anabolic steroids was a book that I bought, just one of those standard whatever, I don't know what publisher it was, but one of those standard books about weightlifting and everything. And there was this one little page or paragraph that said anabolic steroids. I say, what is this? I say, do not take these. They do not work. Right. They are bad. And some athletes resort to this, but I'm like, okay, this means that there's something good about it. So I'm just, then I got kind of curious, and I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a drug aspect to fitness too, as not only, nutrition and whatnot. And I also was I wasn't the most perfect youngster either, and I would go out with some friends and we would smoke pot or whatever and occasionally, experiment with other things. And I just became very interested in pharmacology of the building muscle, pharmacology of mood enhancement, whether it be nootropics or psychoactives or recreational or whatever. The whole thing fascinated me. So I originally wanted to be a pharmacy major. I couldn't get into the pharmacy school, so I got into the chemistry department, which I'm very happy that I did, because I think I'm much happier learning how to make stuff than, though you could be a pharmacologist or whatever, work in research, but studying chemistry and specifically organic chemistry, organic synthesis, you learn how to make stuff. And if I never learned how to do that, I never would have done all the crazy stuff I've done, and we wouldn't be talking right now. So,
and the performance enhancement side of things, a mutual friend of ours, we have quite a few mutual friends, was telling me that you used to go down, and maybe you could place us here in terms of where you were at the time, but go down to the library stacks and try to find molecules or patented molecules that you could tweak or look at variations of. Is that true, or is there is that an aspect of this same time frame?
You're confusing two time frames, but I'll clarify.
I do that a lot.
It started when I got my first job out of undergrad, and I went to work for a chemical company in New Jersey called ISP, formerly GAF. I don't know what it's called now, but I had a boring job. I did organic synthesis. I mostly did polymers. I did some other stuff. my boss was absent most of the time. My day consisted of setting up a reaction and then every half hour or so injecting a catalyst in there and checking the temperature and whatnot. So there was a chemistry library, quite significant, well kept or well stacked chemistry library on that floor. And I started thinking, I got a chemistry lab here and I would like to fool around and make some stuff, I would like to make, some stuff, bodybuilding stuff, and I also was thinking about making other stuff, which are recreational stuff, which was, turned out to be a learning experience. But,
we'll definitely come back to that.
Yeah. So what I would do is, I started out very naive. First thing I wanted to do was make testosterone. And I started off really stupid, thinking that I should make it the way it's made from scratch, which is actually from a plant. Or an extract of it's a yam, Dioscorea yam. And I was able to get an extract or chopped up. And I just made a completely huge mess. It was the stupidest thing to do because later on I realized if you're a chemist, if you're a synthetic chemist, you find the raw material that's available, commercially available, that's closest to the molecule you're trying to make. It's like if you want to build a car, you don't make your own rubber and make your own steel. You know what I mean?
Right.
You buy whatever things that are as pre-made as possible and then, put it together. You save yourself you assemble it. Yeah. So I found out that, DHEA was easily available and cheap at the time. So it was actually, sold to a lot of, AIDS buying clubs and anti-aging people. So I was able to get, good supply of that. And from DHEA, you can make, testosterone, dianabol, Bolden. You can make a lot of things from it. So I was able to make several steroids from that. There were other classes of steroids I could make too. And it took a long time for me to really, get my feet wet, but, I learned a lot of techniques and I learned how to purify things more so than if I ever just done my job that I was supposed to do there because I was learning nothing pretty much.
So you're tinkering when left unsupervised.
When left unsupervised, I would come back at night many times and stay late and people must have been thinking, boy, that guy's working hard.
He was just not on the things you were assigned, right?
Yeah. And I always wondered, if they're talking to my boss saying, your guy's in here all the time. And, yeah. After a while, my boss caught on.
How did you choose the molecules to create? So you mentioned, boldenone, which, the only reason I associate that with sprint cyclists for some reason. I'm not sure if that was in the news in the last few years, but how did you choose which molecules to go after?
Well, first and foremost, it has to do with the availability of the raw material. There was a precursor that was commercially available, and it wasn't controlled, that I could buy, and in one step I could make boldenone from. I was able to buy androstenedione. It wasn't controlled, and I was able to make testosterone from that.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to buy something called epiandrosterone, which I was able to make some DHT derivatives from, and I also fooled around with some 19-nor stuff as well. Several things. So,
so I've always called it, and this is again getting back to this. I've only read it, never had to say it. The androstenedione, but how do you pronounce that properly? I have no idea.
I like to think I'm the one that pronounces it properly, but I've never androstenedione, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. So that correct me if I'm wrong, sort of came to the media limelight with And is that correct? Am I thinking of the same thing?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then the connection there, which is interesting, is that when I was looking up androstenedione, looking up, the best way to make testosterone from androstenedione, I came across a German patent from the former GDR, East Germany. And it had to do with the use of androstenedione as a acute performance enhancer, using mostly nasally, but also orally. It said that it elevated testosterone for 90 minutes or so, and that people would have an acute central nervous system effect and whatnot. God knows why East Germany would publish a patent telling them the world how they cheat is beyond me. But I don't really understand. But I took note of that, and I said, well, I found that interesting, and then I just sort of forgot about it. And later on, I left that job, and I ended up out here in Illinois, and this guy that I was partners with at the time, his name was Stan Antosh, and he had a company called Osmo out in San Francisco, and he and I were with this Locke and my current partner. We're trying to make some stuff. We're trying to make CLA. I came up with a process for that. But anyway, he said to me one day, I want to put together a kitchen sink creatine product that has every best thing in the world. Can you think of any ingredients? And I'm like, well, there's something called androstenedione. If DHEA is illegal, if DHEA is legal, this stuff should be legal. It's not controlled, and it's one step away. It's 2 hydrogens away. And he said, what is it? And I told him what it was. He says, how do you know that that's not illegal? And I say, it shouldn't be. And I say it should be very widely available in China too, because it is a intermediate in the manufacture of contraceptives and all sorts of steroid drugs. And since China at the time had a one-child policy, I'm sure contraceptives were a huge market there. So lo and behold, there was a ton of androstenedione at a very cheap price. So he started to bottle it, and that took off.
And that, just for people who are listening who might not be familiar with this world, that would be referred to as a prohormone, correct? And I've heard you referred to as the father of prohormones, but these compounds that are one step away, like you said, or 2 steps away, like 2 hydrogens away from testosterone. And so it's not controlled when you consume it, but it's converted into something that if you, like testosterone, that if you consumed directly or injected directly would have sort of legal restrictions associated with it.
Well, the whole concept of prohormones was sort of something I came up with. It was a term, but to me, actually DHEA was the first prohormone, but nobody really marketed as that. They just said DHEA does all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And, I knew that it turned into testosterone, but negligibly. But when I came up with androstenedione, the whole marketing scheme with that is that it converts to testosterone. It is a prohormone or prosteroid. And that became a genre, a whole genre of supplements. And there were subsequent products. Then I came up with 4-AD, which was androstenediol. And eventually I came up with something called 1-AD, which was the first one that actually really worked like a real steroid. And that's when things went crazy. That's when the money really started pouring in. But as far as your analysis of the technology saying that if it is an active hormone, it's illegal, that's not necessarily true, because it's, at least as far as illegal as controlled substance goes, because there's a lot of active steroids that are not controlled substances. Now, in 2003 or 2004, I think or maybe 2002, people started selling the active versions of these. They started selling, instead of 1-AD, which was converted to 1-testosterone, people started selling 1-testosterone itself. And I got very upset because I was working with Rick Collins, the attorney. You're probably familiar with Rick.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, we actually had a lobby.
Specializes in this type of case or these
steroid law,
exactly.
Steroid law, supplement law and all that. So our whole defense of these products was predicated on the fact that these are not active hormones and that your body has to convert them, and your body has a finite capacity to convert them. So they have sort of a built-in abuse or proof potential to them. Now, when people started selling and we were actually, Rick and I were actually going to see lobbyists in Congress and whatnot, because there was rumblings that, there were going to be bills or they want to get rid of these andros and all that stuff. And people started selling these things and they wanted, in on all this, let's keep all this stuff legal. And I said, guys, we can't, you're going to ruin our whole argument. And then they got angry and said, "Oh, you just want the market for yourself." And well, it ended up being it was a fail. But I tell you, our efforts did keep the prohormones and those other active ones on the market for maybe 2, 3, 4 years longer than they may not have been if we'd done nothing. So actually going out there and making some noise and helps.
And in the case of, say, 1AD, so 1AD is one of those supplements that I used after seeing a friend of mine. I mean, seemingly, of course, this isn't literally true, but sort of double in size. He was a jiu-jitsu competitor, and I was just like, and everybody just was like, "What are you using?" Because we don't believe it's broccoli, and ended up being 1AD. Can you describe for folks the advantages of 1AD, or I guess before that it was 4AD. If I'm mixing things up, correct me, compared to androstenedione? Because is there because I want people who are, say, unfamiliar with some of the basic chemistry here, to gain, just the basic vocab. Because is there an aromatase component, or, I'd love for you just to describe what the advantages are, compared to plain Jane androstenedione.
Okay. Well, I can make a progression from androstenedione, which is like the Model T,
right,
and to 4AD, which was better, and then 1AD, which was quite different. Anyway, androstenedione it circulates in your blood with testosterone. It's constantly interconverting. It's pretty widely. Its concentration in your blood is significant. It does aromatize easily, which means it'll turn into estrone, which can then turn into estradiol. And at the dosages people were taking, they would get a disproportionate increase in estrogen compared to testosterone, and that would lead to estrogenic problems such as gynecomastia or whatnot.
So just for people who don't know, so gynecomastia, I mean, it's a terrible nickname, but nickname is bitch tits, right? Because you develop fatty deposits in sort of your breast tissue or pectoralis tissue, which is why a lot of bodybuilders have that type of surgery. I just want to provide a little bit of context for people. Please continue.
Okay, so then I came up with 4-androstenedione, which I knew about because back when I would make the testosterone in New Jersey, I always had this 4AD contaminants, and they're basically over reduced. You don't need to know that's a synthetic term. Over reduced androstenedione, and I thought to myself, let me look at this stuff, and I went to the library and I saw that it's natural metabolite and everything, and then I found some articles to say that it actually converts the testosterone a lot better than androstenedione. And not only that, but it can't directly aromatize. Mm-hmm. And it was easy for us to make. I mean, it was a very simple reaction. Just get the androstenedione and just use this reagent called sodium borohydride and methanol and dilute, wash, and it's simplest kind of reaction. So that had a great advantage, and that superseded the androstenedione.
Mm-hmm.
But still, people, would not get like what happened to your jiu-jitsu friend. You said it was jiu-jitsu or?
Yeah, it was jiu-jitsu.
Jiu-jitsu. Okay. And so when I came up with the 1AD, and that was kind of a feat at the time, I probably would be able to figure it out a lot quicker now. It's been 15 years or so. But, I took a long time trying to figure out how to make this stuff because I looked it up. I went to the library and I was looking up, okay, what other natural metabolites of androgens are there in the body that could be very anabolic? Mm-hmm. And I found this one German book on steroids, and I saw this one metabolite that had the double bond. I don't know if you know enough about organic chemistry that there's single bonds as double bonds.
Yeah,
I mean, that's about
as far as I go.
All right. A steroid molecule has 4 rings. And then the first ring, in testosterone, androstenedione, and 4-AD, it's in the lower part, which is a carbon 4 to carbon 5, which this one stuff was carbon 1 to carbon 2. So it was in a weird position. Mm-hmm. But that had tremendous ramifications as far as bioavailability or more so conversion and receptor affinity. And it also would not aromatize. So I looked it up and I'm like, man, this stuff looks like it's going to be strong. So I made some of the dione, and for some reason the compound intrinsically burns like you're putting wasabi on your tongue.
And was this, you were ingesting it orally, or how are you taking it?
Or orally.
Orally, yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, it would also burn as it went through your system and everything. And as pure as you could get it, it wouldn't matter. It was not an impurity. It was a property of the compound itself. So I said, man, I can't be selling this stuff. The few people that tried it, just blew up, but they're like, man, I don't know. I'm in my gut. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to put this on the market. So I, quickly came up with a diol version, which was a little more complicated than I thought, but I found some catalyst that allowed it to do what I had to do. And then that didn't have that problem. And then we came out with that. It quickly became extremely popular. And I remember going to one Arnold, the Arnold Classic.
Yeah, the
right?
Arnold Classic. It's like the Coachella of muscleheads. I mean, it's gigantic. I mean, what is it? It must be like 100,000 plus people easily in Columbus, right? I mean, it's just gigantic. It's an entire city of people. It's like the Burning Man for people in tight pants with big muscles.
What is that motorcycle thing up in North Dakota?
Oh yeah, I mean it's that type of sort of draw.
But it's more than that now. Now it has like 30, 35 different sports.
Oh, it's gigantic.
Yeah. So it's just not even just bodybuilding. But back then it was mostly bodybuilding. And I don't know if you've heard of the distribution company called Europa.
I have. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Back then all the Europa guys were 350 pounds and, just monsters. And I remember them coming around and say, Patrick, what's up with that 1AD? I love it. I take it 20 a day. And I'm like, 20 a day? Are you insane? You're only supposed to take like 3 to 6 a day. But these guys, they do what they want to. They weigh 400 pounds. So.
So just to touch on that for a second, I mean, there's so many different questions I want to ask here, but I guess where I'd love to steer this for a second is when you're on the cutting edge, like sometimes you get cut, right? So if we rewind, and I can think of a lot of examples as a consumer, not a creator of these things, but as a consumer where I'm like, oops, took too much yohimbine hydrochloride and took it too close to ephedrine, and now I really feel like I'm going to have, die of heat stroke. I mean, really, in retrospect for me, I think I was really haphazard and just felt like I was immortal, which is not the case. let's rewind back to you mentioned the recreational drugs, and I don't know if this was in terms of placing it in time when you were in college or otherwise, but I mean, you said there was a learning experience there. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, that would be back in New Jersey. So at the time, well, I guess just to kind of preface it, the whole thing kind of started in high school in that I was on the wrestling team and wrestling practice was really hard. And I looked at my mother's medicine cabinet and I saw there was an old prescription for Percodan. It said for pain. I didn't even know what it was, and I say, I got a lot of pain during my wrestling practice, so I'm going to take one of these before my wrestling practice. And I did, and I had the best wrestling practice ever. People were bending my arm behind my neck and, in all kinds of positions, and I'm just staring ahead. I don't care. And I kind of grew to an affinity for that sort of drug or whatnot. But I never, did anything about it or whatnot. But then when I moved to New Jersey and I had all that free time, I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be nice if I could synthesize something like a Percodan or something along those lines? So I looked into all the different derivatives that were, that exist. And I looked into, Demerol, the morphine derivatives are kind of out of the question because they all start with a morphine type substructure, which is all controlled. And I found out that methadone was something that all the raw materials were not controlled, were cheap and available. It was a 3-step synthesis. It wasn't that easy, but I was able to figure out how to do it. Now, I didn't know what I was getting into.
Right.
And I made my first tiny amount and I took 40 milligrams and because I looked up, it said 10 milligrams is a regular dose. And I said, well, a regular dose is nothing. I'll take 4 times that. And I took it. And then at work, I weighed it out on an analytical scale. And then I walked to the lunchroom and I was feeling kind of giddy and I ate my lunch. And on the way back from the lunchroom, I started spinning really bad. And I just made it to the nurse's office. I just started throwing up and my face was itching. My nose was itching. And I just lay there. And every time I would move, I would throw up. And I lay there for like an hour or two. I made it up to my lab and continued throwing up the whole afternoon, throwing up. Everyone laughed. I made it to my car, throwing up all the way to my car, drove home 10 miles, pulling over every mile or so, throwing up. And I didn't get back to work for like 3 days. I was just throwing up. And I said, I'm never going to touch that stuff again. I said, this stuff is horrible. And then I had a skiing injury, a couple months later. And I was prescribed painkillers or whatnot. And I thought to myself, well, I got that methadone and, maybe I'll try it again. I'll be more careful with the dose and, maybe I'll take it intramuscularly, that way I can, don't have to wait and see. And I'll start with a little amount and won't have to wait an hour to see, whether it's going to hit me or not. So I took it and I was like, this is pretty good. It's pretty good. And then I started to, and it would last sometimes, 36 hours at first. And
that's a long time.
It is a very long half-life. But time went by and I guess it was about a year that I was taking it. And it took months before I realized I had an addiction. And I realized, because one time I just sort of stopped and I was just like, oh my God, I feel terrible. What is wrong with me? Oh, geez, I feel terrible. I wasn't even thinking. And I went to work and I'm like, I'm just going to take a little methadone. And all of a sudden, wow, I feel good. I'm like, oh no, what an idiot. Why did I not realize that this was, and then from there I was like, well, you're going to have to deal with this, man.
How did you get yourself off of it?
Well, I was sort of thinking, and it was really stupid thinking. There was a book back then. I think that guy Andrew Weil or someone else wrote it. It was called From Chocolate to Morphine. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember it, but it was a very candid book about drugs, an honest book saying, which ones are harmful, how they're not harmful. And in there, they said opiates are very addictive. They can kill you with the overdose very easily, but people can take them controlled for decades and not suffer serious health consequences other than maybe being fatigued or whatnot. And I said, well, no, Patrick, you could just hang on until maybe medical science will find some way for you to magically get off this stuff without, discomfort or whatnot. But what ended up happening is they ended up finding out, because I had a big mouth and I was very reckless. They ended up finding out what I was doing at work, and they drug tested me and they laid me off. And so I was stuck with nothing. And by that time my tolerance had grown considerably and I was taking a lot. And it was a horrible, horrible experience. I didn't know what to do. I went to methadone clinics, where the heroin addicts go, and they just looked at me and said, get the hell out of here. You don't belong here. I'm like, but tried to explain my story, but it didn't fit their paradigm. So eventually I went to my doctor. He took one look at me and he said, you need to go. They made some calls. They said, you need to drive 75 miles south to Summit, New Jersey. They got a place for you down there and they'll take care of you. And I drove and I got there and they didn't believe me either. Cause who comes in saying, well, I'm a chemist. I made my own methadone and now I ran out. You don't hear that story.
That's not the usual story.
At a rehab. Sounds like someone that's coming in for free drugs or something. But I was just like, please, gotta help me. So, they did their best to detox me. I spent the first 3 or 4 days on the couch shivering with a blanket over my head. It's even hard for me to remember, but it's just the worst thing in the world. And it went on and on and on. I didn't feel normal again for 2 or 3 months, but that taught me to respect drugs, especially drugs that are of addiction, and don't think that you're immune or somehow you're unique, and that it won't bite you, especially something serious one like that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's, opiates scare the hell out of me. It's part of the reason that I've always tried to, well, I shouldn't say always. I mean, back when I was in my younger, even dumber years, not always the case, but I try to stay away from anything really fast acting, that, in terms of, no intravenous, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate and I was really happy in a way when I had my first reconstructive surgery. They gave me Vicodin and all sorts of different opiates, and they made me viciously sick. I couldn't take them. They made me extremely nauseous, and I was really grateful.
It's funny, Tim, because I've had some situations where I've had to be prescribed opiates recently, and also have had to have them, in a hospital itself intravenously and whatnot, and they don't make me feel good like they did back then. If I'm in a lot of pain, yes, they will numb the pain, but they just make me feel kind of yucky and moody and nauseous. I lost the affinity for them. There's no recreational value with them anymore. Thank God.
Yeah, I remember. And so the follow-up question I wanted to ask was, what other drugs that athletes take you think have a high abuse potential or are dangerous? And the example that comes to mind. So when I was I must have been in college, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to afford it. Had to have been working. Was a newsletter. I can't remember the name of it, but by Dan Duchesne.
Dirty Dieting.
That was probably it. And I remember when he started talking about DNP. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
And the stories, I mean, they were told to be entertaining. And I was like, Jesus Christ. I mean, it just seems like rolling the dice and waiting for the Reaper on like Snake Eyes to come and to take you out, because it seemed so dangerous. But what are there any particular drugs or classes of drugs that come to mind that you think are dangerous or have a high abuse potential that athletes use?
Well, DNP is probably the most dangerous one. I do not think it has a high abuse potential because it doesn't make you feel good.
No.
There's no reinforcing effect of it. But then you mentioned Dan Duchaine. He's actually the guy that sort of propelled me into this industry, and he was my mentor, sort of. And I knew him quite well and discussed DNP with him. And I knew his fiance also. And she used to call me all the time. It was a very strange situation, but she had told me Dan's gone and everything, but Dan was reckless and didn't always have his, I have a lot of good things to say about Dan, but I gotta be honest, Dan was reckless and he used a lot of clients. His clients were almost all women as guinea pigs, and did some things that could kill him. And he had this girl taking DNP and insulin at the same time. Oof. And she said that she almost died. Now, coincidentally, later on, Dan convinced her to go get calf implants in Mexico. That ended up becoming infected, and she ended up getting her legs amputated. Jesus. And she was a very depressed, almost suicidal woman to begin with. And I remember when that happened, I was just like, this is just, well, we're going off on a tangent.
No, but it's dark. I mean, Dan
Dan.
You could tell, I mean, just in the writing, I mean, you could tell he was very conflicted. He's very smart, but very conflicted.
He could be a very nice person, but he could be a very selfish person, and he could just not care about people sometimes. And I think the way he was towards women sometimes, he was, I wouldn't call him not physically sadistic, but psychologically sadistic.
Aside from the, say, methadone, right? Are there, and this is related to the other question in terms of what is dangerous, or potentially dangerous. Let me put it that way. Is there anything that you avoid testing yourself for any particular reason? Or using for extended periods of time?
Bodybuilding type stuff. Well, insulin, I'm not sure about, because I have no evidence that taking insulin in a fashion where your blood sugar does not stays under control is particularly dangerous. Mm-hmm. A lot of people saying that taking exogenous insulin will lead to insulin insensitivity. Right. But I don't think that insulin itself leads to that. I'm not so sure, so I'm not convinced of that argument. Mm-hmm. Certainly insulin, if taken without the right amount of food or at the wrong dosage, could lead to hypoglycemia, and if not addressed appropriately, could lead to coma, possibly death. Mm-hmm. But insulin's one of these things that I don't think is, if used judiciously, it's not necessarily going to hurt you. Now, it could probably would lead to adipose or visceral fat deposition. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's specifically visceral fat, which is, the fat between your organs, which is the fat that's associated with metabolic syndrome, hypertension, type 2 diabetes and
all things you generally don't want.
Atherosclerosis. Yeah, exactly. But, in the context of bodybuilding and a diet that's of a certain type. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but I'm sure if you just eat like crap and take a lot of insulin, that will happen.
Yeah. Well, if we took a slightly different tack on it, what are some of the biggest wastes of money that if you look at just the world of competitive athletes and trainers and so on?
I think the biggest waste of money is this IGF LR3.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain what that is?
Well, IGF
it's something like growth factor, but LR3 I've actually never heard of. Or
okay.
I've never heard those three.
Okay.
Letters.
Well, I'll make it brief. The IGF-1 is it's a big anabolic hormone in your body. When you take growth hormone, pretty much all the anabolic activity that's growth hormone manifests itself through is IGF-1 that's made in the liver. You take growth hormone, there's growth hormone receptors in the liver. They get turned on. Your liver pumps out IGF-1. IGF-1 goes out. That's what makes your bones grow, your ligaments grow, and whatnot. And if you're young enough, maybe your muscles too. Now, back in the 90s, there was no regular IGF-1 available. But what was available was this derivative or this analog of IGF-1 that had an amino acid taken off to allow it to not bind to what are known as IGF-1 binding proteins. And the reason why they did that, because it was meant for petri dish in vitro studies, and they wanted the IGF-1 to be free to do exactly what it had to do and not worry about these, binding to stuff, and then it would throw the experiment off or whatever, right? So this stuff was never meant for humans. But it was available. So people were like, oh, it's the best IGF-1 because it doesn't bind to binding proteins, and people were taking it. But the whole thing is the fact that it doesn't bind to these binding proteins means that when you shoot it in your body breaks it down almost immediately, because the way your body uses IGF-1 is actually, it has to bind to something called IGF-1 binding protein 3, which titrates it, extends its half-life, delivers it to the tissues at the right time and whatnot. So people are still stuck under this illusion that this in vitro version of IGF-1, which is cheap, still works. And, by now people are not really talking about it because enough people have tried it and seen like it doesn't do anything, but it's still in people's arsenal for some reason.
The IGF LR3.
IGF, yeah, LR3. Yep.
If you look at the various compounds that you've either created or resurrected, which are you proudest of? Just from a sort of creativity, problem solving standpoint, what is your what fills you with the most pride?
I think something I made called 6-oxo.
I was going to bring up 6-oxo because that was another one on my list that I've encountered over the years. So please, explain 6-oxo to folks.
Well, there's no other compound that my company spent as much money on to show efficacy, to show safety, and also to show that it had no anabolic activity. It was purely an aromatase inhibitor, an aromatase inhibitor being a compound which prevents testosterone or certain endogenous androgens from converting to estrogens. And that's all it did. It was trying to learn how to make it was quite an experience because it's a very violent reaction. And you gotta keep it really cold and you gotta learn to add one thing to the other. Violent
meaning it could explode in your face, or how violent?
Well, not actually fire violent, but actually go out of control and boil and just spray solvent and reagent all over the place. I mean, it's called an exotherm.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do this in my lab, and then we had to scale up to production level, and we got it down to where we were able to make reproducible batches, great purity. I remember, we were the first. That was the first aromatase inhibitor product on the market that actually worked. I mean, there was chrysin before. Actually, chrysin was something that I originally came up with and offered to Bill Phillips. Mm-hmm. I actually worked at EAS for 2 weeks. Didn't work out very well.
Your employment record kind of sounds like mine.
I went from place to place until I found my little home in Illinois, and I've been here since '96. So I have a great business partner. We are very synergistic. I'm the guy in the lab, and he's the guy that knows business, and he's the guy that puts together the huge reactors and and all the manufacturing stuff. So, but I digress. 6-oxo. Put it on the market and everything, and we paid Thomas Incledon, who I forgot where he was.
Arizona, maybe.
Yeah, Arizona. Yeah, and he did a study, and I remember I went to a show in New Orleans, and I was sent the results, and I was like, "Wow, this stuff works!" I was showing everyone, "Look, it works! It works!" And it was really great results. And that made me very happy. And we had to, results presented at a poster presentation and whatnot. I was able to tell people about it and do an ad on it. And it became a very good product. And it wasn't, the thing about it is that I knew that the prohormones, the 1AD, 4AD and all that they were going to be gone. It was
just a matter of time.
Yeah, the whole industry had become polluted. People were selling methyl 1-testosterone. People were selling, synthetic liver toxic versions, and in 2005 they all went off the market. But this was a product which was not an androgenic anabolic steroid. It basically reduced your estrogen, which then prompted your pituitary to make LH, which then caused your testicles. Luteinizing hormone. Yeah. And then would cause an upregulation of your testosterone production, and that, natural testosterone production. So your testicles would not shrink. They'd actually probably grow a little and whatnot. And, the product became quite popular. And I remember we, at the time, my brother, who had been a investor in our business, an unhappy investor, he after a while, because things didn't move fast enough for him, he got out, and then he met some people, and he actually started the company,
the supplement company.
Yeah, so he was the CEO of, and one of their biggest products had 6-oxo in it. And I remember I hope I'm not breaking any HIPAA laws here, but I saw blood work on the 6-oxo, and he got a very good effect from it. Mm-hmm. So he was a big believer in it. His company didn't last too long. There was a lot of, infighting and whatnot, but it was a great product. But in 2009, a pitcher named had a positive for androstenedione, and it was blamed on the 6-oxo. And I was, I had read it, and people were calling me, and I was just pissed off. I'm like, don't blame it on that. That's stupid. I mean, and then there were all kinds of theories I had, but that it's possible that the 6-oxo itself could be used as because androstenedione can metabolize the 6-oxo or whatnot, or he could have been taking something else or whatnot. But, I say, I know my product. I know it's not contaminated with androstenedione. And we certainly didn't spike it. And I remember talking to my attorneys, and they're like, Patrick, they're taking this stuff very seriously. They had you're not supposed to tell anyone this, but they had a hearing about this, and they had some big expert saying that he believes that androstenedione was deliberately put in the product. And I'm like, what? And yeah, he's talking to important people. I'm like, so you guys should be ready for anything. I'm like, this is BS. And I just like, and then a couple of days later, I'm getting ready for the gym. I get a call on my phone. It's like 5:15 a.m. So it's Patrick, Mom, such and such from the Drug Enforcement Agency. We need to be let into your plant. And I thought it was one of my friends screwing with me. I said, fuck you. I can't swear. But
you can swear on this show.
Yeah. All right. So I hung up. And then I was like, and then it rang again. I'm like, hello? It is a raging snowstorm out. And at the time, I didn't have my license and everything. And I'm just like, oh no. And I'm thinking, what could it be? And I thought to myself, it's not the 6-oxyl, because there's nothing wrong with the 6-oxyl. So I went there thinking, what do they think I'm doing? I was just so confused. So my partner had to bring me up, go through the raging snowstorm. We get there, and lo and behold, they're there for the 6-oxyl, and they have a search warrant, and they believe that we are spiking it or something. And I just remember getting kind of very angry and frustrated, and that whole situation turned into a huge nightmare because they were determined to not let it go. They did not understand the technology at all. They did find a trace of the stuff in there.
Androstenedione.
Yes, it was below the detectability of the instrumentation that we used for quality control. So they were never able to prove that we knew it was in there. But I mean, it's in the parts per million range, and it's physiologically insignificant. Yet they were determined to somehow make me pay. My attorneys, Rick, and at the time Mike, the manager and whatnot, they went up there and gave a presentation that I helped them with that totally. There were like 15 people there from the DEA, FDA, whatnot, and they completely knocked them down. I remember that the investigator he said the investigator slammed his fist on the table and ran out of the room. He was so pissed off. But not only that, but they came to town and they visited all my workers, and then they dragged them to New Hampshire for grand jury hearings. They read my secretary her Miranda rights on the stand because he thought she was lying. It was insane. But after 5 years, no charges, but the damage was done. It took away our biggest money maker, and it was a big blow.
Sounds like an exhausting 5 years.
It's the thing about the government is that they can accuse you of something and ruin your life, and you could be completely innocent and you do not get compensated. Now, I'm not saying my life was completely ruined, but I'm saying that it was significantly downgraded. I don't want to go into detail, but it was not good.
What was your first contact with Victor Conti? How did you come in contact with Victor?
Well, I used to argue with him all the time on the internet.
And for people who don't recognize the name, could you provide some color or or not color, but like who is Victor Conti, or who was he at the time?
Well, he has this little slimy used car sales and mustache. I don't know. Oh, you don't mean to describe him physically?
No. But this is you know what, we can back into that though. So you used to argue with him. What did you guys argue about? And roughly what time, what year was this?
Well, this would have been around 99 to 2000. There was something called Usenet. What do they call them? Groups.
Usenet, the bulletin boards and
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They were very cumbersome, but that's how people, would chat back then in groups. And there was one called Miscellaneous Fitness Weights. And Victor was on there, a guy named Lyle McDonald, Bruce Neller.
Lyle McDonald of the ketogenic diet.
Yep. Many other people, Will Brink, you name it, anyone back in the time. And Dan, of course, was there too. Victor came on and would push his ZMA all the time.
Yeah, that's zinc, magnesium, aspartate, or what? I don't remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Which I still take. I think it's a decent product, only because I think that, a lot of people are deficient in zinc and magnesium. And I think it's as good as any. So, but, so he would talk about his product and the studies he did, which was sort of, structured to give the results that he wanted, I guess, and it was sort of hard to believe and whatnot. And people like Lyle, who tends to be pretty negative, and if he sees anything that he thinks is BS, he's going to lay into you. So he really laid into Victor, and I kind of laid into Victor a little bit too, but not so much, because I would read it and think, well, at least he did a study. Mm-hmm. Let's see if there could be something here. I don't just assume that, it was fake or whatnot. Give the guy, a benefit of the doubt or whatnot. And so he saw me as someone that was not necessarily an ally, but at least had a degree of objectivity.
Semi-neutral party.
Yeah. And he also used to make fun of my prohormones. Oh, your prohormones don't do anything. Oh, they suck. And then one day I get a private message from him. They say, hey, tell me about your prohormones. Do they beat drug tests? And I'm like, well, no, but I know something that does. Now, if you want to go down that path, I'll tell you how, what I sold him at the time was this stuff called norbolethone.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's an anabolic steroid that was never marketed, or if it was marketed very briefly, but it's mentioned in a lot of the original literature. For instance, there's certain famous books, one by a guy named Charles Kochakian, another by Julius Vita, who wrote sort of research compilation books on anabolic steroids. And they talk about all the ones that are made and what their properties are, toxicity wise, anabolic androgenic ratio, potency. And norbolethone always was a standout. And it's a very odd chemical. But I always knew that it was closely related to a very popular or very widely available progestin used in birth control pills. And that progestin is known as levonorgestrel. And it's found in something called Norplant. It's also found in a wide variety of well-known birth control pills. So I knew that I could make this norbolethone from levonorgestrel by a simple selective hydrogenation, which is simply adding hydrogen molecules to one part of the molecule, which is done with catalyst and hydrogen gas, whatnot. So I always wanted to do that. And at one time, our company had a partnership with Metrex. Mm-hmm. And partly because Scott Connolly and his deceased, God bless his soul, partner, or he was like his Smithers. I don't know if you remember.
The Simpsons?
Yeah. Billy was like Connolly Smithers. I loved Billy. Billy was a great guy. He put up with a lot of crap. but they really liked me, and they wanted to pick my brain. I think that was one of the reasons why they partnered up with me. So we would have our meetings, and then they say, "Hey, Patrick, you meet Billy. Let's go into the office." And then it's like, "All right, what can you make?" What can you do? It's funny. But I was like, something, there's this stuff called Norbolethone I've always wanted to make. And I just needed some raw material, and I know it could be gotten from China. And then we work with TCI, one of the biggest distributors of chemicals out of China. We get you whatever you want, I say, well, you can get me some of this levonorgestrel. And I gave him the CAS number, which is a number that is associated with chemicals, just to make sure that you don't screw up
Yeah, important to get that right.
Yeah, it is. You get the wrong thing and you die. So, he said, yeah, I'll get you some levonorgestrel. And I'm thinking, maybe they'll get me like a gram or something. So I get 200 grams shipped to my lab. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, look, I could, just thinking to myself, wow, I could probably do a lot of things for this. And I thought to myself, I could probably get into a lot of trouble too.
If you had to buy that yourself.
Oh my God. If you were to buy a gram or so through a research chemical company, it would be like $300.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You just don't.
That's a serious payload right there.
And that's for free. Just said, hey, here you go. Make some. So I made some, I gave it to Scott and Billy, and they loved it. I had a friend over in Greece, who's interested in things like this. Gave some to him, several other people. And then, I had already, and then a sprint cyclist, actually many grade B athletes used to contact me back then, and I hooked them up. I have too many stories to tell you, really screwed up stories like that. We would just go on forever. But eventually, no, there was this, who came into the picture later, who was a sprint cyclist girl, and she took a lot of it and everything. She was not very careful with what she did, but this was all before I even met Victor. All right. Mm-hmm. So I met Victor. He emailed me saying, hey, do your prohormones beat the drug test? And I say, no, they don't, but I have the stuff from the Norbolethone. So I say, can you send me some? I sent it to him. I didn't really know I knew who Victor was, Mr. ZMA guy, Mr., blah, blah, blah. And, but I didn't know he was connected with a lot of the high profile athletes like he was. So he comes back and he says that, loves the stuff. And so he was one of the guinea pigs, and he said, Victor says he loves it too and whatnot. And they passed it through their inside guy at the UCA lab, who I found out his name was Victor Urolitz. It's very funny that the whole Balco story that people don't know is how many people worked both sides and just got away with, it were never dieted or chastised in the media or whatnot, that facilitated this whole thing. Now, Victor had this guy, Victor Urolitz, that worked in Don Catlin's lab. And he sent us, he would send urine to him, and he would put it through the rigmarole and, hey, come out clear. So that's how the name Clear came about, because Victor Urolitz would say your urine is clear. So
the Clear is the Norbolethone.
The first Clear. The first Clear was Norbolethone. Then back to like a man. It was a wonderful woman. She looks like a woman now, by the way. She's not competing anymore, and it's amazing sometimes how women can become virilized and then stop and for the most part, revert, though the voice sometimes retains some of because the larynx doesn't, totally shrink.
Yeah. And I think this is just to pause for a second. So if for those people who are wondering what androgenic versus anabolic means, do you want to just quickly define the difference? Because people think of steroids, but then you also hear, I guess like AAS, right? So
sure.
When you're looking at the profile of these things, just since we brought up the voice and the vocal cords and stuff, can you distinguish between anabolic and androgenic?
Well, anabolic precisely means growth of muscle tissue. That is the goal when people were developing anabolic steroids, was to develop a compound which only grew lean muscle mass, muscle primarily. Now, testosterone also brings with it secondary sexual characteristics such as growth of pubic hair, growth of the prostate, seminal vesicles, and beyond that, you have androgenic alopecia, which is male pattern baldness. You have growth of the larynx, acne, body hair. These would be anything that's outside of the realm of muscle building, and that's something that obviously a woman would not want to have happen to them. That's androgenic.
Got it. So that's why it's important for people. Well, people look at the relative sort of anabolic strength versus androgenic effects when looking at which of these drugs to use potentially.
Yes, they do. But people also make a fatal mistake in thinking that just because a drug has a good anabolic androgenic ratio means that they could take that drug at any dose and it won't be androgenic. The thing is that these drugs that are low androgenic, they are low androgenic at a minimally anabolic dose, basically. So there's a selectivity there that's dose dependent. So if you take 5 or 10 times that dose, you're going to get the full androgenic activity.
Oh, got it. So yeah, so if you're popping oxandrolone like Pez or whatever, you're still going to end up with a good amount of androgenicity or whatever.
So when that girl comes up to you, I don't understand. They told me it was Anavar.
Right.
Oh.
That's because you're taking mega doses. Got it. I took you off track a little bit though. You're talking about norbolethone.
What? She was so obviously on something, and she just became a target. Don Catlin's lab was out to find out what the hell she was on. So they were examining.
Just for context for folks, who's Don Catlin?
Don Catlin is retired right now, but he was the head of the largest drug testing laboratory for the Olympics, Olympic drug testing in the United States back in late 90s, early 2000s and whatnot. So he had his UCLA laboratory, and they made a project out of finding out what was taken. So they determined by looking at her urine that she was taking norbolethone. I forgot how they may have actually looked at metabolites and then made some and matched it up. But the funny thing is that guy, Victor Urolitz, who I mentioned before, had told Victor that way back when they conceived the anabolic testing protocol, he wanted to include norbolethone in the list of drugs to be tested. But Don Catlin and these other people said, no, let's not bother with that. That stuff's no one can get that. It's not commercially available, So Don kind of was proved wrong on that. But anyway, so they found out that she was taking it. And the thing is that I was told, actually I got my timeline a little wrong, but even before that, Victor, that Victor Urolitz had told Victor Conte that they're onto norbolethone and everyone has to stop taking it now. And I told, don't take norbolethone anymore. Do not take it anymore. I got some new stuff. It's called I called it trend stuff, but it became known as THG or the clear, the clear or whatnot. But she, I like the norbolethone. So she kept taking it so that she got caught. She's connected to me. And then, that really screwed things up. And then the Balco thing came down as a result of, an investigation that, an IRS agent was doing. But that's another story.
Well, I just, for just some personal context, the reason that when Balco just exploded in the media, I followed it so closely is I moved to the Bay Area in 99 and I lived in Mountain View originally, but also San Jose and traveled to San Francisco. And I guess Balco was in Burlingame and it's like Bay Area Lab Cooperative. Is that what it stood for?
Yeah.
But I remember seeing the sign and so it kind of got incepted, right? And it's like, oh, like the red doorknob in this, and what the hell was it? Not the Sixth Sense, the one where the main character ends up being dead the entire time. I'm completely blanking on the movie, but the point being, I followed it really closely, and also at the time was involved with sports nutrition and met athletes who had some ties to Balco, but it didn't mean anything to me at the time.
Sure.
And when we talk about, say, Catlin and the cat and mouse game of drug testing, so you mentioned THG. I'd love for you to just describe how that came to be. And that's what, tetrahydrogesterone? Am I getting that right?
Tetrahydrogesterone.
Yeah, close. So this is a rare chance to actually get corrected on this stuff. So how did THG come about?
Well, I told you before that norbolethone was made from a progestin.
That's right.
That's a drug that's found in birth control pills. Well, there's other progestins out there too, lots of weird ones. And there's one called gestrinone, which is actually not used for birth control pills, but used for a disease called endometriosis, which is a female disease of the inflammation of the uterus
lining, right?
Yeah, uterine lining. So, I was just looking through the Merck index. I look at structures. I can.
What is the Merck index? I mean, that's MERCK, right? But
MERCK. Yeah, the Merck index is it's a compilation of compounds. It's not every compound in the world, but compounds that are natural ones or drugs or ones that have significant use in the industry. And there's maybe about 10,000 in there. And they add ones, they take ones away. So I go in there and I look up, they have a index for progestins. And so I find this one called gestrinone. I look at it and it is a hybrid of trenbolone, which you've heard of.
I have. Yeah, it's a favorite among powerlifters, among other people.
Yes, and among cattle too.
Among cattle, yes.
Yes.
Another thing that I do not advise kids to try at home is to take these pellets and turn it into something you can inject in yourself, necessarily. But trenbolone.
Trenbolone. So it was a hybrid between trenbolone and norbolethone. It had the three double bond structure of trenbolone, and it also had this weird extra carbon coming off the ring structure that norbolethone had. And I say, if I turn this, add the 4 hydrogens, turn it into an acetylene into an ethyl, which basically makes it less progestational and way more anabolic androgenic. I can do the same reaction that I did with norbolethone and come up with something that no one's ever seen before and probably is a lot stronger. And that's exactly what happened. So the really cool thing about it is that I made a molecule that no one's ever made before.
Yeah.
But the thing that I didn't know, which I found out later, which I'm reluctant to admit, because if I just don't admit it, it'd make me look so much more brilliant than I am. but I'm an honest person. But I did an interview with Bob Costas, and in part of that interview, he interviewed Don Catlin, and Don Catlin said, this molecule, it just disappeared in our instrumentation, and we were amazed. We were like, whoever's doing this must be brilliant. And I thought to myself, well, I didn't know it would disappear. Though it kind of makes sense because of the way they test it, they have to derivatize it for gas chromatography, and it would be very unstable, so it makes sense, but I didn't think that at the time. So they actually had to change their whole means of testing steroids. They had to use different instruments because of that. But all I know is that it worked, and it worked at a very low dose. Victor was using it at extremely low dosages and getting very good results from people. But I tell you, that stuff was weird. I mean, I had tried it.
What made it weird?
It made you feel angry. It made you feel, it dried you out and made you feel really hard and strong. It had a, anti-mineral corticoid effect, which is, anti-aldosterone, basically sort of like a spironolactone. How do I put that? I think you know what I'm talking about, but yeah. Put it simpler. It's basically your kidneys make your adrenal makes a hormone called aldosterone, which causes you to retain sodium in water and excrete potassium. And this blocked that. So basically you would excrete water and sodium, and you would have a diuretic effect, and you would look shredded.
But was the anger a result of just feeling like you were cutting weight for wrestling? So you're just in that type of dehydrated, sort of high heart rate rage state? Or was it something else?
No, it wasn't anger. It just made you feel irritable.
Yeah.
Yeah, certain steroids do that. I mean, another one that does it is halotestin or fluoxymesterone. Mm-hmm. And there's no one really knows why certain steroids have effects on the brains, on the brain. And there's ones like Dianabol, which supposedly make you feel good and whatnot, but no one has a valid explanation for that. But
I've heard, maybe you can speak to this, and I know Chris Bell and Mark Bell, and they did the documentary. I always get the order wrong. I think it's Bigger, Faster, Stronger.
Yep.
What types of other drugs are contraindicated to take with anabolics? Because it seems, and I might be pulling this from hearsay, but that many of the cases of, say, people committing suicide or committing a homicide, say, when they're on anabolics, is often while they're simultaneously taking, say, SSRIs or anti-anxiety medication. And it's hard to say if it's correlation or causation, but are there any particular drugs that you think are contraindicated for athletes? Let's just use that example, who are taking anabolics.
As far as psych drugs go, I don't know of any, but certainly with orals, you do not want to be on a blood thinner like Coumadin or anything like that. In fact, I had a friend who was taking Superdrol. Superdrol was one of those over-the-counter designer steroids that was quite potent, and they actually thin your blood themselves. They're antithrombolytic. So if you combine them with these blood thinners, let's say if, your doctor thinks you have blood clots in your legs or whatnot, and you're also taking steroids, especially an oral steroid, you can easily to have excessive bleeding, and my friend ended up having, bleeding ulcers in his stomach and had to go to the hospital. He's like, why does this happen? And I was like, what are you taking? I'm like, I'm taking Superdrol in my blood thinners. It's like, well, you shouldn't do that. Well, you didn't tell me. Well, you didn't ask me. So, yeah, never take a blood thinner with that. And that's a lot. I don't know if you know this, but with a lot of anabolic steroids, people get bloody noses, and that's exactly why.
Huh. I did not know that. That makes perfect sense. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but I was just, the image that came to mind was people doing, powerlifters competing in meets and getting bloody noses. But then again, they also have like 1,200 pounds on their backs. So it could be a combination of factors.
The blood pressure, the transient blood pressure that they experience during a lift is phenomenal.
Yeah.
If you could measure it, it would, I don't know why the blood vessels just don't split and explode. So.
Now, you've been involved with a number of different companies. I have to ask because a friend wanted me to ask you, and I'm going to get is it ursolic or ursolic acid? I have no idea. But he wanted to know, when is he going to be able to get more ursolic acid? And maybe you could explain for people what it is.
Oh, okay. So
and this is prototype nutrition that we're talking about.
Okay, so this is the spray. Okay. So I first heard about ursolic acid when a study came out in a journal called Cell Metabolism, and it was written by a guy from University of Iowa. He was the researcher. They used some technique that to identify genes that were turned on or off in muscles, genes that had to do with catabolism or anabolism. And they were basically looking for catabolic genes that were turned off and anabolic genes that were turned on. And they used something called some sort of a library, a database of genes, mRNA, expression signatures or something. And they use 1,300 chemicals, just natural chemicals, drugs, whatnot, or whatever. And they put them, through this algorithm or whatever, and it came out that ursolic acid just seemed to, do everything. The second one, which was a far second, was metformin.
Very interesting. Okay.
Which is a very interesting molecule in itself. However, it didn't really have the anabolic effects. So they ended up giving the ursolic acid to mice and rats, and they found that the muscle fibers grew bigger, they got stronger grip, and they didn't gain any weight, but they had a proportional decrease in fat mass. And they also looked at, what's going on with hormones, or, the mechanisms in the muscle, and gene expression. And one of the big things they found was a large increase in muscle-derived IGF-1. We talked about that earlier. Earlier we were talking about IGF-1 produced in the liver, but there's also localized IGF-1 produced in the muscle, which is more relevant to muscle growth. So the ursolic acid had an effect on that. And then there was a second study done by the same group, which found that it increased the amount of brown fat.
Yeah.
Quite significantly, which caused the mice to have a higher levels of energy expenditure, because they would eat a lot and not gain any weight and run around, and the brown fat would just burn off all the calories. So I originally came out with a product which was just ursolic acid extract from rosemary, and I realized quickly that the stuff had no solubility in water or oil. You basically put it in water and it won't even wet. It just, you mix it up and it floats and it's completely dry.
Sounds fun to drink.
Yeah, you can't. Well, you put it. That's why you put it in capsule, but still, it's in your stomach and it's just going to sit there. And unless it somehow solubilizes, you're not going to absorb it.
I tried to do some stuff with I think it was leucine recently, and I got this industrial packet of leucine, and the same thing happened. It was just like I could shake it until my arm fell off, and it would just sit there on top of the water. It was horrible.
Now, the thing with leucine is that it will eventually wet and go into solution. Mm-hmm. You got to be very patient.
Just have to keep going.
You have to keep going, and they have ways to instantize it. But ursolic acid just will never. You can 100 years you can stir it. It'll come to the top. So I went about trying to find derivatives, and I first made an acetate out of it, which is basically taking a hydroxyl group and make an ester out of it, an acetate ester. And then there was another functional group, which is a set of atoms that are attached to the molecule, that was a carboxylate group, which I could then make a salt out of. So I ended up making an arginine salt acetate, and I found out that the solubility properties of that, it wouldn't be soluble in water. It would wet in water. However, it would be soluble in solvents like methanol and whatnot, which are good indicators of something that could absorb through your intestines, or through your skin. And I decided to make a spray, because I thought that, well, first of all, so it was a lot easier. The manufacturing method required a solvent to begin with, so I figured I would use a transdermal type solvent and sell it that way, and it ended up becoming a very popular product, and it worked quite well. I mean, people could really feel something from it. They would get within a week or so, greater vascularity, greater muscle volume. So that has been one of our best selling products.
One of my friends gets ridiculed by his significant other because it's just like 40 times at night.
Yeah.
When will people be able to get that again? Because I think it seems like it's been sold out for a while.
Well, I just made 2 kilos of the stuff, so next week.
Soon. All right. Well,
by the time this airs, it will have been 2 weeks in the past.
So yeah, people who are listening, if you're listening to this first, I would not daddle if you're interested in getting this stuff, because it will sell out. If it's increasing hypothetically, and this is just a question that I get a lot, so I'd like to bounce it to you. If it's increasing IGF-1 production or IGF production in any number of ways, at what point does that increase the risk of cancer or cancerous growth?
It's muscle specific. So I think it's kind of does its activity in the muscle and sort of, decomposes and doesn't really affect systemic circulation. So unless you have some kind of a tumor in a muscle or something, I can't see it really having an effect, because it's not going to reach systemic circulation and then say go to your prostate and stimulate a tumor there or anything.
Right. This is a totally selfish question, but I'd imagine there are some people listening who would be asking themselves the same thing. If you were, and you're probably so sick of getting this question, but I have to ask it. If I would like to get better at chemistry and understanding organic chemistry, clearly out of school, what would you recommend I do? I mean, I have the cognitive apparatus, I think, to learn it. I just have never approached it in any type of systematic or interesting way. I mean, are there any resources, any approaches that you would suggest if I want to become basically just very rudimentary, in a rudimentary way, fluent in more of the language of chemistry, so that I can just be more informed? Well,
you're absolutely correct. I do get that question a lot. And to be honest with you, I don't have an answer, because the way I learned organic chemistry and all this was a very laborious process of taking courses and being frustrated and not knowing what the hell anything meant, and working and studying and taking exams until it clicked. So to say that you're going to pick up some book and, you know, read it for an hour a night or something and then suddenly start to understand all this, you know, unless you're some sort of genius, you know, like amazing person. Yeah, like you learn Chinese in 2 days type of person. I don't know. That's a good question.
Here's maybe a slightly different question, because I think what I might do, honestly, is just reach out to one of these extension schools in the Bay Area, like UC Berkeley or whatnot, and see if they have some type of introduction to organic chemistry that isn't going to want to make me slam my head in a car door. That has, you know, some type of decent teacher and structure to it.
You've taken general chemistry?
I have not. I don't know. That's embarrassing to say, but I don't recall if I have or not. Partially because, in a very undirected, myopic way. I mean, most of what I've learned, I feel like most of what I've learned from chemistry, I have taken basic. I'm almost 100% sure I've taken basic chemistry and then also some neurochemistry in the first few years of college. But most of what I've ended up learning is through self-experimentation and then wondering what could go right, could go wrong, did go right, did go wrong. I mean, from an athletic standpoint as a consumer, I think it just came down to, similar to yourself, it's like, oh, well, that's very curious, but I'm not sure the journalist is getting it right. Let me go to the library. Yeah. Let me go to PubMed. Let me try to figure out, like, is there even a plausible mechanism, right? And I remember reading a story about you early on with, I think it was yohimbe and like the testosterone and that whole experience where you're like, wait a second.
Yeah, that was actually before the dioxin. And they said that the advertisements used to say that yohimbe contained testosterone. So I bought a bunch of yohimbe capsules, broke them open, and extracted them with a solvent and got this green yuck. I'm like, testosterone's not supposed to be green. and then did an NMR, which is a nuclear magnetic resonance test on it. And I'm like, this is a bunch of crap. And I realized, you know, once I started looking through the chem abstracts, which was in the library that was on the floor I worked on, and cross-referencing yohimbe with testosterone, there was zero connection there. So I realized that the whole thing was a lie.
Right. So
yeah.
No, I was just going to say, like, that's, so for looking at it from a slightly different perspective, what happened with me is, I was, yohimbe and yohimbine were popular at a point they kind of made the rounds, right? I mean, they're fads and in supplements for fat loss. And it was thought like, well, because of these particular receptors that might be effective for reducing body fat in, say, the legs or wherever it might be. And took this yohimbine, and my body does not agree with that stuff. I just get extremely overstimulated, and I feel like I'm on the verge of vomiting the entire time that it's, I guess, peaking. And that made me interested in looking at, so you read beta agonist, and then you realize there are different types of, beta agonists. Like, what the hell is an agonist? And okay, well then by learning what an agonist is, you start hearing about antagonist, and then down the rabbit hole we go, right? So that's, a long answer to a short question, but I really, if I have taken chemistry courses, I need a significant brush up. But what were the biggest wastes of time for you in the classes that you took? The things that you're like, this actually had no application to the practical side of what I'm interested in. Is there anything that comes to mind? Well,
one graduate course really pissed me off because it had to do with analytical chemistry, advanced analytical chemistry, instrumentation and whatnot. And it was very interesting. And we didn't really deal with the instruments directly very much at all. But I studied my ass off, and I wrote one of the best reports, the best papers, and the guy complimented me on it. And I learned the theory and all that. And the exam ended up being, what is the inner diameter of a column that we put into a GS 390? And I'm like, what the hell? You look this stuff up in a manual, and everything is like stuff, if you're a tech or something, it was almost no theory. And I was just like, what is wrong with this teacher? I just was so frustrated, and I ended up not passing the course. So, I mean, the course was useful, but the exam and the way the guy approached, what the student should come away with was completely out of whack. But I also hated physical chemistry, thermodynamics. It's good stuff if you want to be an engineer or whatnot, but, I wanted to be a synthetic organic chemist. So that stuff, and it involved a lot of math. I hate calculus and all that, so.
So I'd love to ask a couple of fan questions that have come in, and then we can segue to some of the stuff that you're working on right now. The first is, and I would love to know the answer to this too. This is from Michael Taphouse. When will we be able to measure our own BHB levels without blood? BHB, for those people who don't know, is beta-hydroxybutyrate. So currently, if you're experimenting, as I have been often with ketogenic diets, exogenous ketones, which we're going to get into, I'm using the Precision Extra device from Abbott Labs to measure my ketone concentration in millimolars. So when will we be able to measure our own BHB levels without blood? And I'll just modify that and say, or in some easier way.
That's a Dominic question, right?
That's a Dom question. Okay. Yeah. So,
and I'm sure I did, and I didn't listen to the entire Dominic interview, but I listened to most of it. But I imagine you probably brought that up, and what his answer would be the acetone breathalyzer, and I don't know how accurate that is. Dom seems to think it's relatively accurate.
The ketonics, or something like it. Yeah. So the ketonics. So the Dominic we're talking about, for people who haven't heard, I did an interview with Dominic D'Agostino, who's a fascinating researcher and scientist who also deadlifts like a freaking monster, but is really, really savvy with this stuff. The ketonics, so I have a ketonics device. Side note, because I was doing the whole series of strange experiments where I was getting 100 grams of vitamin C intravenously and doing all of this stuff. And I wanted to monitor my ketone levels while getting this infusion, because you can't use a glucometer, I realized, because I scared the living hell out of myself while I was getting one of these IVs, because I started to feel a little funny, and I was wondering if I was hypoglycemic, because I'd been scared by some horror stories that I'd been told by folks. And so I used a glucometer, and it came out 385. And I was like, uh-oh, that's not good, because
wow.
It came out 385, and my millimolar concentration was probably about 6 at the time. It was high. And I was like, well, that sounds like ketoacidosis if the device is accurate. And the doctor who was supervising me said, there's no way that's accurate. It has to be broken. He tested it himself, 80. And just to place this for people, this was around 5 p.m., right over the Golden Gate Bridge, gridlock outside, not immediately close to a hospital. So I had a doctor supervising me, but if I required some type of sophisticated operation, I was not in a good place. And it turned out, because then I tested it again, 389, and I was just like, wow, as is usual for me, and which is why people should always do their own homework and get a tattoo that says "Don't try this at home." Don't do that, folks. Actually, because people that like 1 in 1,000 will probably go and get it. But when I feel like I might have actually done it, meaning like, oh, I think this might be it. Like I've finally statistically just gotten to the point where one of my self-experiments backfires to the extent that I'm like going to die. I looked at it and I was like, just kind of laughed and looked at the doctor and I was like, well, that's not very good. And it turned out like, it turned out that the vitamin C, causes the strips that are used for reading the blood drop in these glucometers to malfunction. It messes with the electrical conductivity or something like that. So I wanted to track my ketones, but I knew that I would get an error with the BHB through the finger pricks, which always happened after these IV infusions. And so I was playing with the ketonics. The downside of the ketonics, and maybe there are more advanced versions now, but it's basically like keto sticks, and it will with a pee on, and it says if you're light, moderate, or heavy, but it's no more specific than that. So I was like, I know I'm high. I want to see how it varies over time. But sorry for
no, I understand that, and I'm working on improved versions of exogenous ketones. I'm actually ready to file a patent. I can't give away what I'm doing or whatnot, but we have a whole bunch of strips here, and we've been doing our own blood tests, and they're vital. I mean, you need an exact number to make a graph.
And so let's talk about the exogenous ketones. So because it's come up in a few other interviews, including in Dominic's interview. So KetoCaNa or KetoCaNa, no, Tropicana. Yeah, that's it. I'm remembering it. KetoCaNa and
yep.
Keto Sports. So when I'm flashing back to this conversation that I had with Peter Attia, and he was talking about drinking jet fuel in his kitchen at one point, just like dry heaving for an hour and trying not to wake his family up. And that was the like Model T version of the ketone salts that I think, Dom had shipped him in some nondescript container. But you've made a lot of advancements. So I guess the questions are, how did you get introduced to the sort of the exogenous ketone world? And just this is because I've heard it from so many people. Sorry, this is long, but it's not androgenious ketones. I don't know what it is on the internet, but like so many people refer to them as androgenious ketones. I'm like, no, they're not androgynous. Exogenous, like exoskeleton from outside the body. That's it. So exogenous. So how did you get introduced to all of that?
Well, I'm so glad that I did, because at the time, I was kind of stuck in the whole bodybuilding supplement world, which is very limiting, not very rewarding. And for someone like me, I love the sport and, and a lot of great people in it, but it's just dead. It's all, how am I going to get a pump, or what is the best stimulant I could take to make me insane before I work out, or what's going to be anabolic, and you can't sell anything that works anymore. So Dominic D'Agostino called me or sent me an email saying, I'm looking for some contract synthesis work. And, I know, Patrick, I saw you on the boards. I know you're a chemist. People mention you, and I haven't had any success with anyone. And what I'm looking for is to make what's known as a ketone diester. It is a pro drug to acetoacetate, which is a ketone. And I said, I know what ketones are. I know all about that. And I thought to myself, sounds like some really cool stuff, because I had known about the ketogenic diet and everything, and I knew about ketones and that they are a fuel that your body uses. And I started, doing some searches and said, okay, there's a big opportunity here. So let me make the ketone ester for him. He could do his studies. And it took a few months and whatnot. I was able to make some good stuff. And he ended up, this first study, which was the CNS toxicity study on the rats. Yeah, which was supposed to be, had applications for the Navy SEALs and their rebreathers and whatnot. And he had tremendous success with that. And then it went on that he got a grant or approval to do cancer stuff, and he got tremendous results with that. And as you know, he's continued to do research and show phenomenal things with these exogenous ketones. Well, we started off with the diester, and I thought to myself, well, I would like to get in on this gig. So I wonder if I can come up with some kind of a supplement version. So I said, well, I know that you can make salts out of these. I know that there's sodium beta hydroxybutyrate out there because I've seen it before, but I know it's like $1 million. And I said, I got to find out a way to make this cheaper. And, I did a lot of research and stuff. And I did find a way to make it, at a price that your people could actually, afford to take it in effective dosages. And, I made potassium sodium, which was the original stuff. I don't know if that's what Peter took or if Peter took the stuff from Oxford, or it may have been my stuff, the original KetoForce, which, by the way, is not meant to be drinking straight. You have to mix it with an acidic beverage.
I think what he took at the time was just some equivalent, but I think I remember at some point I got these ketone salts from Dom, and I was like, they just sat in my refrigerator for months. Yeah. I was like, I cannot build up the courage to take this stuff down.
He wasn't given appropriate directions. If I drank that stuff straight, it'd be like drinking salt water out of the ocean, kind of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you throw up. So, and then Dom did some research and found, it raises the blood ketones and whatnot. And we did a patent together. I had an idea, how do we patent this? So you can't just patent the salts and whatnot. And I said, let's combine it with MCTs, see what happens. And, we found some results that, that looked like there were some significant changes there. And then there was a patent, applied for with that. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole. That's a mess. I don't want to go down there.
Yeah, no worries. What are the most interesting applications of exogenous ketones? Because I've used it while fasting. I've used it while just making the transition to ketosis to make it a little easier as you're going through that very grumpy gray zone. It effectively alleviates any of what people might call keto flu for me. I know a lot of endurance athletes use it. Or take it prior to aerobic workouts. Like, what are the most interesting applications in your mind of these exogenous ketones?
First and foremost, endurance athletes, and the many teams at the Tour de France, were utilizing these ketones, whether they be salts or the stuff, the monoester, the Clark, Kieran and Clark, Richard Veets. I don't know if you know their BHB ester.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that the team that won they had actually an exclusive contract. They denied taking it, but the writing's on the wall. I have all his messages everywhere, but there are also people that were on ketogenic diets and also taking exogenous ketones. I mean, keeping their levels up in the range of 5 millimoles per liter. That's up there.
Yeah, it's up there.
And they had, they obviously that's not an easy thing to do, so they wouldn't be putting themselves through all that suffering if they weren't getting the results. And they were getting the results. And I've also had Ironman people, MMA people that love it, that use it. Certainly if...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Certainly if you are avoiding carbs, if you are on a ketogenic diet and you want to go to the gym, and, normally people that are on regular diets, they'll drink some carbs before or during their workout, because your body's going to burn up carbs and you need to replenish to keep your blood sugar up and whatnot. But if you're on a ketogenic diet, your body's not using carbs really. It's using ketones. So you're going to go in that gym and you're just going to start working out, and your ketones are going to be used up really quickly, and you're going to tank. So if you are in ketosis and you need something during your workout, you drink exogenous ketones, and it'll be like drinking carbs. I mean, you'll feel your brain will be energized, your body will be energized. You won't tank. It's pretty amazing. I mean, people that I've given it to people that are like, I'm on the ketogenic diet and I work out. I feel like crap to try this. And they're like, wow, I didn't get tired. My body, had all the fuel it needed.
Yeah. And for me also, just on day 1 or 2 of converting from carbohydrate dependent to fat adapted, trying to get to at least, say, before I hit about 1.5 millimolars, if I have to do an interview or something like that, then I'll just take a serving of the KetoCaNa 15, 20 minutes before I'm set to start the interview. And I've been really impressed. Are there particular types of people who should not take it, or who should get some type of supervision or permission from their GP or whatever to consume it? Is it contraindicated with anything?
The BHB part, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I mean, people that are diabetics can go into diabetic ketoacidosis, but that's a special condition, and I don't think this little bit of ketones is going to exacerbate that or anything. Mm-hmm. But if you are some of these products, the sodium load it's not really, really high. I mean, you can have a pizza and have 5 or 10 times the amount of sodium, but if you're on a sodium restricted diet, you have to take that into consideration. Right. But other than that, I don't think there's any problem.
What makes you different in the world that you've inhabited up to this point? I mean, in the creation of these different things, in the creative problem solving, coming up with THG, et cetera. If you kind of look back, what are the things that make you as good at it as you are? Because there are a lot of folks trying to do these things, but you've had an incredible amount of creative success.
Well, when I got started in this whole thing would be the early 90s. There was no internet back then. There was, like I said, there was chem abstracts, which are this endless volume of large books with extremely small writing that you'd have to cross-reference, and they were very, very hard to understand. And I learned to understand these things and then look up articles, and I had the patience to drive to a library to here to there, find these things, and I learned how to research in a very primitive way, and I learned the patience of researching, and I got a head start before anyone else started to be, to kind of start to do what I was already doing. And there's a lot of researchers out there that, yeah, sure, they can research and they can find, a study that this does that does this, but do they actually have a lab? Can they actually make this stuff? Can they actually test the product to see if it really is what it is? I've also developed a certain intuition that tells me if something is worth exploring more or not. And that depends upon a lot of things. It depends upon the journal. Well, it's not really intuition. It's actually logical. It depends upon the impact factor of the journal it's published in. Are there other publications by, unrelated authors or whatnot? Is there a plausible mechanism? I don't know. I mean, I think it's just a lot of experience and just an affinity for this kind of thing.
When do your best ideas tend to come to you? Is there any pattern to it?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times I'm not a consistent producer. My mind tends to go through periods of where I'm not creative. I'm frustrated. I don't feel as though anything's going to happen or whatnot. And then I'll come across something and then I'll get a spurt of energy and creativity and all these things will come out. Sometimes, I'm laying in bed trying to go to sleep and I'm like, I think of 4 or 5 different things and I'm like, wow, And then I, try to remember what they were and I should write them down. But, and then I work on them, I guess that's, not unheard of.
Do you have any particular morning routines that you find helpful? I mean, aside from the usual, I mean, do you wake up? It sounds like you wake up on the early side. What is it? What time do you wake up and what does the first, say, hour and a half of your day look like?
Well, if I go to the gym, I'll wake up at 5. First thing I do is I make my coffee.
How do you make your coffee?
I just make it with a coffee maker.
You just drink black coffee?
No, I put cream in it and some Splenda. I don't put any butter in it or anything like that because I do it before I work out and then nothing against bulletproof coffee and everything, but I find it to be a little heavy on my stomach if I go into a gym.
You might also have higher disaster pants potential.
Yeah, I don't. No MCTs before the gym, for sure.
Okay, and then what does your workout routine look like? Or like on a weekly basis or whatever you happen to be doing now.
Well, as far as let me start with, I prepare my workout drink, which is I have this stuff. My friend is a trainer. His name is Ian Danny. He has a product called Amino Matrix. This company's called Optimum EFX. It's very expensive, but since I've worked with him, we make some of his products. I get it for free, but it's basically a full spectrum essential amino acids that's enriched in branched chain amino acids with some other things thrown in there, alpha lipoic acid, citrulline malate, and a few other things. And I mix that with about 45 mils of KetoForce, which is the stuff you're not supposed to drink straight like Peter did. So if you mix it with Amino Matrix, which is very tart, it buffers the alkalinity of the KetoForce and it ends up tasting quite good. So I drink a little bit of that. I take it to the gym. Lately I work out maybe 3 to 4 times a week. Sometimes, if I feel I'm motivated to really get into, extra good shape, I'll work out more. However, I usually combine, I do legs and arms in the same day a lot and, chest and back and then shoulders, abs, and I mix it up sometimes. And I do cardio. I haven't gotten into a lot of the kettlebell or some of the athletic type of, different kind of things.
Metabolic conditioning stuff.
Well, yeah, some of those, yeah, exactly. Which I would like to do, but, I just don't have the time to learn it all. I just don't. I'm an old dog. You can't teach me trick.
So speaking of old dogs, do you have any? How are you thinking about longevity or extending lifespan? Is that a high priority, or do you not spend a lot of your brain cycles on it? And if you do think about it, what do you think are promising?
Well, I worry about my health over the next year or 5 or 10 years. I go to the doctor and sometimes I have abnormal blood values and whatnot, and I don't know what's going on there. And I worry about that, because I don't want to come down with any sort of condition that's going to knock me out or anything like that. I worry about, cancer and all that stuff. I'm not worrying about whether I live to be 85 or 105. That's not, why worry about that at this point? I'm worried about quality of life in the immediate future. I've been thinking about I was taking metformin for a while. I stopped. Sometimes it upsets my stomach, but I've read a lot of research on it, and it seems to be maybe the most promising of the anti-aging drugs out there. And
yeah, it is. It does seem to have a fair amount of interesting data behind it. Rapamycin is interesting too. That entire kind of class. But I haven't taken either at this point. I don't know, for whatever reason. I don't know why it makes me so. I have so much trepidation about it. I guess it's because I feel like once you're on it, you probably, if you're taking it with the explicit purpose of extending longevity, it seems like once you're signed up, unless some type of contradictory data comes out against it, against the efficacy or indicating side effects. I'm going to switch things up just a little bit because I know that you are in a different time zone and I want to be respectful of your time, but I have a couple of what I would call rapid fire questions. Answers don't have to be short. They can be short or long. But when you think of the word successful, who's the first person who comes to mind and why?
Successful. I guess Bill Gates. Not so much. I mean, he's financially successful, but he's also become quite a philanthropist. He's done a lot of good things. He's not just made a lot of money, but he's also put a lot of effort into making the world a better place. And I think he seems to be psychologically feels good about himself.
Mm-hmm. Is there any particular book or books that you've given a lot as a gift?
As a gift, I've received books as gifts. I don't know if I gave my mother the book, Kennedy book by I think it was Chris Matthews, the guy from MSNBC, because I know she loved Kennedy. She met Kennedy at his inauguration. Here's a weird story, but but one of my favorite books is by an author named Jared Diamond, and it's called Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Guns, Germs, and Steel. Yep.
Yeah, I read that. That really gave a big eye opening on why certain people of the world are more advanced than others, and why people behave a certain way, and as opposed to just genetics and this person's smarter because they're this or that. There's so many aspects to it. It got to be quite a scholarly feat though near the end. The book was he was quite detailed.
What are the most common misconceptions about you, or is there anything that you would like to clear up in any way?
Well, I used to have a persona on the internet as being short-tempered and arrogant, and I have a sarcasm that doesn't always come across in the written word so well. And I've kind of toned that down, but there's still a lot of people that maybe they just want to believe that I'm a jerk. I'm not sure. I don't get out and travel and go to shows, go to conferences nearly as much as I should. And I know I really should, because I'm kind of a recluse when it comes to that. Because I know, a lot of my colleagues they're here and there and everywhere, and everyone's meeting each other. And I feel as though everything's happening. I'm being left behind. So this year I'm going to try to change all that. But I run a business here, or one of the people that run a business here, that we do production. We have to be testing every batch and whatnot. And I have to be here. So it makes it kind of hard.
I think you and I have a lot of shared DNA in that department, where I can pretend for very brief periods of time to be an extrovert, but I find it very exhausting. So that's part of the reason that I'm cutting back significantly on all of the shows and conferences and whatnot that I attend this year, because I just find it extremely draining.
Oh yeah.
But you also end up being reactive, right? In the sense that when you're in the cave working on production, I mean, you can, I would imagine it's easier to set your priorities and get less distracted by shiny objects than if you're out and about being bombarded by all of these inputs at a conference. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been in that world, but that's what I would imagine to be the case. What advice would you give your 30-year-old self? And maybe you could place where you were, what you were doing at the time.
30 years old is when I moved out here. I would say, don't listen to that Stan Antosh guy. Stay the hell away from him. Cause he really, there was like 2 or 3 years where I could have jumped ahead a lot quicker if it wouldn't been for him. It's hard to say. I would, I mean, if I knew all the stuff I knew right now, I would just say, "Hey, I know how to make this. I'd make it." You can't say that, you know?
Right. It's
like
buying Apple. Yeah, right. It's like, well, if I knew then what I knew now, right?
It's just an unfair question. It's just, you mean like philosophically, as far as demeanor and all that goes?
Anything. It's a wide open question, but we can also table that one for now.
I would be more patient with people and not, on the internet and whatnot. It was, in person, I was always good and everything, but I kind of grew my reputation on the internet, and I would become impatient and belittle people and sort of if they, and whatnot, and some people thought it was really funny, but it did turn a lot of people off, and I don't, I'm ashamed of that. It's not who I am. So
there's and this is just because it's so topical. I want to at least bring it up, and we don't have to discuss it, but there's a current scandal that's been discussed pretty widely about Delta 2. Do you have any interest in commenting on that, or would you prefer to just leave that be for the moment?
No, that's interesting. They that all came about with
and if you could catch people up who are not, just give people some context for those who aren't familiar.
I wish I had that guy's name. Well, the whole thing came about with the doctor in Indianapolis that was prescribing growth hormone to his wife, and I guess a couple of years after, someone went to work for that organization, and he heard about that, and I don't know, I can't really remember, but Al Jazeera did a undercover thing, and they found about this guy. But part of what this guy was also doing was selling this stuff called Delta 2, which was a anabolic steroid that was never marketed. And I heard a lot of people talking about it. For instance, they asked Victor Conti about it, and Victor doesn't know what it is. And obviously, he said it was no good, it was weak or whatnot. And it's actually something that I made back in the early 2000s and tried it out. It's very difficult. It's weird stuff to make because it turns into like fiberglass and expands. You can't filter it. You have to make it into an acetate, but whatever. That's all chemistry stuff. But I made it into a spray, and I was thinking about selling this as a supplement. I never gave this to athletes as, undetectable type thing or anything like that. It's actually a pheromone that elephants, female Asian elephants, tend to excrete in their pee in very large amounts at certain times of the month. It's strange. And it's also found in human sweat, believe it or not. I think the bacteria in your human sweat take some of your endogenous hormones like androstenedione, which are metabolites, and they convert it into this delta 2. But I ended up making it into, just for a couple of people to try, and not athletes or anything like that, but into a oil-based injectable, the 100 milligrams per milliliter. And that was based upon some studies that were done that showed that the stuff actually was quite potent. It was pretty much equal potent to testosterone, milligram per milligram, but not as androgenic. And the people that tried it, they liked it, very much and whatnot. And that kind of came and went, and never bothered with that. But my guess is that, some of the people that tried it already got around, and someone else got it made and did the same thing, and then this guy was one of them, started giving it to athletes years after. And I in retrospect, I think I heard about this stuff being given to athletes a few years back, but didn't believe it because I didn't think that the drug testing organizations would not be able to find it. I thought it would be way too easy, but maybe not. But it was just interesting because I read about it and I said, "Oh man, that's that stuff I fooled around with."
It's old news from 2001.
Old news. And then I see Victor saying it's no good. And I'm like, and Victor's saying it's a prohormone, it's oral. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. It's by injection as the acetate. It's very effective. It is.
Delta 2. What are other drugs or molecules that you think we will be hearing more about in the next few years in the media? Right? So maybe they've been around for a long time. Maybe they're new. What types of, I'll rephrase it, just like performance enhancing drugs or therapies do you think we'll be hearing more about in the next few years?
Well, a lot of the most promising ones have to do with gene therapy. And those have been around for a long time, and they don't seem to go anywhere. There's a lot of safety concerns. I can't think of any actual small molecule or peptide drugs that you just inject that do a heck of a lot. That's a good question, but I did talk to someone from ESPN not too long ago, and he asked me a question about what do I think is going on? What is the most advanced thing that's going on that you think? And I say, well, I always had a suspicion that the Chinese may be using gene therapy. And what they could do is that they could actually probably engineer embryos, probably insert certain genes that express certain growth factors or repress certain other genes or whatnot, and these kids can grow up to be superhumans, and that could have happened as far back as mid to late 90s, and those super kids could be coming of age right now and competing. And I've seen some of these Chinese athletes that just kind of, they don't make any sense.
They look like the bully whippets that have the myostatin inhibition.
Right. And at the same time, they have completely smooth skin, and there's no androgens going on. You know what I mean? It's just sort of puzzling combination of characteristics. Yeah. Do you have any opinion? And I don't. I'm getting pretty deep in the my ignorance pool here, but SARMs, like this selective androgen receptor modulators. Is there any there, or is that's just it's an acronym that I've heard kind of thrown around a bit recently. Do you have any familiarity with those or thoughts on those? I have a funny anecdote about those, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. But the guy that shares my lab right now, he used to be a salesman for another chemical company in town that we had done some work with, and they would make drugs, small amounts for research for other drug companies. They were basically a contract synthesis place, and they made thousands of SARM candidates. And there was one that looked amazing on paper, and they gave it to the rats, and within a day, all the rats were dead.
Oh God.
So that just shows you that something that works in vitro, you don't know what's going to happen. But as far as SARMs go, they're basically trying to do the same thing that androgenic anabolic steroids do. They know a lot more about the mechanisms from the receptor to the nucleus and everything that happens in between. And there's a lot of events, chemical molecular events that happen there that can determine whether a compound is potent or whether it's selective in a certain cell or not. And so they know a lot more. And they have molecular modeling where they're able to, come up with theoretical compounds to say, well, this attaches to that, well, that, and then they find a custom synthesis place to make the molecule, and then, they try it on the rats and whatnot. So it is, they're basically trying to, and plus they're not confined to the steroid structure, because these structures are so divergent. They're completely different looking, yet they all will combine some way to the androgen receptor. So they're not confined by any one structure, and so there's thousands and thousands of possibilities out there. However, they still have yet to eliminate the androgenic anabolic separation. They have yet to eliminate the hepatotoxicity. Basically the cholesterol,
the liver issues,
the AST, ALT enzymes.
What do you mean by the anabolic androgenic separation? Oh, just reducing the androgenic effect. Yeah.
You'll never get zero androgenic, 100% anabolic at any dose. They've gotten very good separation. I don't know how much better. I mean, if it's that much better than, say, a primobolan or whatnot. But they do find that at higher dosages, like I said before, the androgenic effects do start creeping up. However, but I think they are doing better and whatnot. But then they certainly haven't done anything about the HPTA shutdown, which basically means shutting down your body's own testosterone production. These compounds still will do that. Mm-hmm. So there's no great improvement there. It's sort of like, better anabolic steroids, but they're still in the same thing pretty much.
Yeah. They're not the breakthrough that, at least at this point, that a lot of people would hope them to be. Are there any molecules, and I'll ask just a few more questions, are there any particular molecules to you that you think are exceptionally beautiful or elegant? Are there any that just really stick out to you?
As far as how they look on paper?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, just like the reason I ask, it seems like a weird question, and it might be a bad question, but I know mathematicians, for instance, who find certain equations just to be very elegant to them. They're like, wow, all right, like that does so much with so little. I would call that beautiful, right? So I don't know if that exists in your world of chemistry, but if it's not something you think about, then it's not. There doesn't have to be an answer to that question. I was just curious.
Well, I wouldn't say a specific chemical structure, but there are certain compounds which crystallize beautifully. I don't remember what it was. I was working with something. And by crystallize, I mean, a lot of times you purify things by heating them up in a solvent or solvent mixture until you reach the point where it goes clear. I mean, it's cloudy and it gets hot enough. Things are more soluble when they get hot. It goes clear, and then you let it sit, and it cools down, and then the pure chemical tends to sometimes crystallize, and some things crystallize into these big, long needles, and the needles get bigger and bigger. Then you have and that's what I find beautiful, because that means that I have a pure compound, and that makes me very happy. Now, when things don't crystallize, and sometimes they'll sit there and they'll turn into this nasty oil, that pisses me off. I don't like that. So I love nice crystals. Nothing makes me happier than nice crystals.
Right. Well, on that note, Patrick, this has been a blast. I enjoy getting into the weeds, and you're constantly selling out of everything. So the best place for people to find the KetoCaNa, if they want to experiment with that, is ketosports.com, or is there a different place you would suggest they check out?
Well, ketosports.com has the information. We yet to have the ability to sell off that page. So go to Prototype Nutrition, one word, prototypenutrition.com. That's where you can get the KetoCaNa or the
ursolic acid,
or the UR spray. And we also have other products under the Keto Sports brand. They're all sold under the Prototype site. We have a C8 caprylic acid product, which is a MCT. That's only the C8, which is the best MCT. We have a combination coconut and ghee product that's good for cooking. That's keto friendly. We're about to introduce a product that reduces blood glucose by inhibiting absorption from intestine and speeding up elimination of glucose through the urine, which will cause your blood sugar to drop and will help you reach ketosis a lot quicker.
That's very interesting. Well, I would like to. I will go check that out right now. That's very, very interesting.
Well, there's been studies on it. There's enough safety data on it. I don't want to give away exactly what it is, but
no.
We have the material here. We just having trouble tableting it. We have to do some granulation work. But But by the time this interview comes out, but this product will probably be available. So
fantastic. Well, then people can check it out. PrototypeNutrition.com. And of course, as always, everybody, you will be able to check out plenty in the show notes, all the links, everything else at 4hourworkweek.com/podcast. Are there any other sites? And of course, I'll put these in the show notes as well. But any place that you would encourage people to see what you're up to or find you online?
Well, I have PatrickArnoldBlog.com. I don't keep it updated much lately, but I probably have about 30, 40 articles from the past. A lot of them pretty unique stuff, you know, that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
Perfect.
I have a Facebook page, but that's mostly for just being a wise ass. So.
Which, all right, so people can find you on the Facebook, and I'll get that from you as well. Is it a fan page or is it just a personal page?
It's just a personal page, but we also have a company called eFarm Nutrition, which has not been a big priority lately, but they have a Facebook page, and Prototype Nutrition has a Facebook page. I think that's about it. That's
great. Well, I'll list everything out, and Patrick, there are lots of rabbit holes we could go down, of course.
I know.
Maybe we'll do a round 2 with some additional rabbit holes, but thank you so much for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. Thanks.
And everybody listening, as always, thank you. And until next time, work smart, play often, and experiment well. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number 1, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email, and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. And until next time, thank you for listening.